Welcome to another episode of They've Got Now. I am really excited to be joined today by someone who is getting into, well, you've been in coaching, but getting into your first start with D1, and that is Sydney Wiese from over at Oregon State. Sydney, first and foremost, how you doing?
I am good. Thank you so much for having me this morning. I've heard so many great things about your show, so it's also
Oh,
an
wow,
honor for
that's
me to
really
be
nice.
with you. So thank you so much for having me today.
Not making me humble blush early on. I appreciate it. No, I mean I can say the exact same thing about you. I know, we have some mutual friends, and I've heard a lot of great things about you. So I'm excited to get you on. I think just in general, in terms of looking at your career path the last couple of months, it's been pretty wild, and I can't really imagine what that's been like for you. So I want to start with that. I mean, in March, you're finishing up playing over in Turkey. Came over for training camp with the Sun, got announced as an AC with Oregon State, your alma mater, in July, and you officially retired from basketball 2 weeks ago. So like, how do you even kind of condense what this last 6 months has been for you? Because that is a lot of stuff all going on at the same time.
Yes. If you would have told me in March that I would be here with you talking about being an assistant coach, I would have been like, no, like I would be overseas. I'm still playing. I'm a faith-based person,
Yeah.
and I think through prayer and just really being discerning and listening, when this opportunity presented itself, it just felt right to say yes for many reasons. And so God moves fast sometimes. And so I was first anticipating being with the Sun for the summer and playing in the WNBA. And then when that didn't work out, I took some time off, and I told myself, okay, like whenever my agent and I were talking about overseas opportunities to play, and whenever I would sign with an overseas team, then I'll get back in the gym and get ready for that. And all of the opportunities that he was presenting to me, it just none of them felt quite right. And so when Coach Ruick called me about being an assistant coach, I didn't say no right away. And so I was like, let me unpack this and pray about this a little bit. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, this is what I know I'm supposed to be doing. And so now here we are back in Corvallis, and I'm so grateful. I haven't doubted my decision at all. And it's been a blur, of course. Like you said, the last 6 months have been
Mhm.
crazy. But it's been so much fun to be in this position. I don't take it for granted. And I love being able to be in a position where I can use all these experiences that I've been able to have as a player, and begin to give them back and to serve, and then to also learn about this level of coaching as well. So it's been a lot of fun. Um, and I have great people around me that have made the transition a lot easier.
Yeah, no, I love to hear that, and especially like you kind of feel like you get to walk away on your own terms a little bit too, right, and transition into something new. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
glad you
I
get to have
think
that.
Yeah, I think, that was one thing, like, when you never like, is there ever a good time to stop playing unless your
No.
body decides for you? And I didn't want my body to decide for me, and I think to have been able to play professionally in the overseas, I am very fortunate to have done so many things as a basketball player and to reach the highest level in many ways, and I think as I was praying about it, it is a privilege to make the decision too,
Mhm.
to basically be able to make that choice, but also transition so smoothly into like next thing. Like that's like it's rare, and I do not take it for granted. And so, um, the timing again, it just sort of felt right. Of course, like I think what also helps is I still get to call the gym the office every day. Like
Yeah.
I'm still in the gym in some capacity, and I still get to be around the game. And so that's been also, I think, has made the transition easy as well, because like it's shifted, but like I'm not totally separate from the game of basketball.
No, absolutely. I think it's so interesting too because I know so many, former players are kind of when they're getting out and trying to figure out what's next, they get into coaching sort of by accident. It feels like that's something that, this has been a little not planned is the wrong way to put it, but it feels like this is more like something you really want to do, getting into coaching. I know you started off doing some stuff in high school when you were recovering from injuries the last couple of years. Um, did you ever, well, like you mentioned off top though, you kind of really didn't see yourself being in this spot? Was that something that you were just kinda doing it to pass time a little bit, see what it was like, but now you're just, you're kinda sold on it.
Well, I think that was my first taste of like, oh, I think I love coaching,
Yeah.
because I'm a pretty one track mind person. And playing has been that track since I started when I was a kid, and I had goals and aspirations to just, like, make it as a basketball player, and so I always struggled, and I sort of felt self-conscious, like, when people would ask, like, "What are you gonna do when you're done playing?" And I'm like, "I don't know, because 'cause I'm still playing." Like, I'm still trying to play. Um, and it requires everything of me, like, my full attention, my full focus, like, I it's tough for me to be future oriented sometimes because I'm so focused on, like, how can I do what I'm doing right now super well? And so as a player, when I was trying to navigate all of that, I didn't have the time that it required to sort of like dip my toes into other professions. Like I always knew basketball playing was going to end, but I was like, but I'm still doing it now. So I can't, like, I'll cross that bridge when the time comes, and I trust that timing. And so thankfully, like tearing my ACL was honestly one of the biggest blessings of my life because it gave me that window to try other things because I couldn't play. And so I did commentating and I did coaching, and I was able to really establish like I enjoy commentating, but I love coaching. And I to feel that for the first time, it made me super excited and hopeful that like okay, whenever I am done playing, I know that I have something that I genuinely love, and I love the opportunity, whatever it's going to look like. I didn't know if it would be at Oregon State like it is now, if it was going to be at the high school level, whatever it would be. But I knew like I loved how it felt when I was able to try it at the high school level. And so that was my first taste of it being in that position.
No, that's awesome that you were able to have that, and like you said, kind of having it being a blessing in disguise a little bit, and having that injury because obviously it sucks, but I think people don't recognize, and one of the things I always try and do in just like writing or anything is like, dude, being an athlete is, less than 5% is the stuff happening on court in a game, and I think so often people who, and I'm like I don't blame people for it, but if you're not in and around it all the time, I don't think people realize how much goes into being ready to play a game. And so what you do to fill your time outside of that, whenever I do like draft prep or anything, talking with, players who are coming into the next level, like the biggest thing you're going to have to learn when you're coming from being a college athlete is everything isn't structured for you. Everything is, you have to learn how to be a person outside of basketball in some ways. And um, that's really difficult for a lot of people. I think that's one of the biggest things that people struggle with in finding consistency in day to day is like, when everything isn't set up for you, how do you kind of figure out what your life is supposed to look like when basketball can't be every waking moment? So it's, yeah, it's just like a very different thing that I think, until you kind of go through it a little bit, people don't, you don't really recognize what that's going to look like.
Yeah. I think what I there's a lot of people who are way better at it than I am. Like I know I would have teammates when I was playing in LA, like I had teammates that were going to practice and then they're on to their next business thing or like
Yep.
a sponsorship meeting or whatever they had on the docket, and I said that is amazing for them. I am just trying to figure out how to be the best basketball player, best teammate I can be. And so it took me a lot more effort to just manage, I think, wanting to play the game super well. But I think what has now helped me is knowing like I put everything I had into playing. Like
Yeah.
there is no doubt in my mind, no regrets in my mind of like I poured everything that I had into being the best I could be as a basketball player. And so now as I transition away from actually playing, um, I know there's no regrets on my end. There's no doubts in my mind of like I have been able to surpass even like when I got to the league, like my first couple weeks of training camp when I was a rookie, I was like, okay, this was my goal, but now what do I do with it? Like, what do I like? I want to do something with being a pro, and I didn't know what it looked like. And so I think just being present every moment, and then the people that you're led to. I think that's been the biggest thing for me is like I've had mentors along the way. I've had amazing teammates, and then being able to play overseas, like you just build so many cool relationships that um as you're going through different parts of your playing career now, post playing career, those don't change. Like they sort of evolve with you,
Mhm.
and like it's just like a web of connections that you never know where people are going to lead you. And so I'm really grateful that the game continues to connect me to amazing individuals. And it gives me opportunities to experience different things in life that without playing or without being around the game of basketball, like I wouldn't have those opportunities.
Yeah, no, I love that perspective. I think that's such a great point. Like so much of it is, you build these relationships and you just kind of never know where they're going to take you sometimes. Like people that you meet a half decade ago, or somebody that you end up, it's a one off, but then you end up running into them, and they become a pretty significant part of your life a couple years down the road. Like it's
Yep.
interesting the way that stuff works out sometimes. I think like especially once you get to the higher level, like basketball is so interconnected.
Yes.
It's a little wild. You can't go anywhere without running into somebody, which is a blessing and a curse in some ways. But um, I wanted to backtrack a little bit too, because obviously you mentioned, getting the call from Scott about, coming over and making this happen. How did that come about? Because I've been like, like sifting through trying to see like how did this start? Where, how did you kind of first get the inkling that this was going to happen? And what was that initial conversation with Scott like?
Yeah, we've stayed in touch since I've graduated. He's like a second well, he's like a father figure to me, like a
Yeah.
second dad to me. And so we've stayed in touch throughout the years. And each time that there'd be a coaching position open, he would call me and just like offer it, quote
Yeah.
unquote. But like I think he knew and I knew like no, like I was in the midst of like navigating playing. Like I said, I was just so focused on like I'm in it right now. I'm trying to figure it out. Not now, not yet. Sometimes I would tell him often like not yet,
Yeah.
but still not really anticipating like who knew? I didn't know if it would ever lead to me actually joining the staff. And then when he called, it was just like a check-in call. It started as a check-in call. And then he just said like, hey, love to have you on staff, similar to like in the past of like, there's an opening. So if you want to take it, like, think about it. But the tone of this call was a little bit different. And I felt it a little bit differently, I think, just because of my own personal journey and what I've been through, to sort of, I think, create that space of feeling like I think I could say yes this time. Because in the past, I just didn't feel I had my own stuff that I was trying to do. But I think this time I felt like I did have the capacity to actually be of service and help others. Because I think sometimes when you're doing what you're trying to do as a professional athlete, in some cases, it's pretty selfish. Like it is a very selfish path because you're like, in order to play at the highest level, we all have our ways of preparing for that. And it takes up a lot of time.
Mhm.
And so again, shout out to all my teammates who are parents and like are taking care of others along the way, because I know for me, like what it required for me to do my job in that 5%, like when the lights are on, it was so much. And so this time when he offered that the opportunity to come and join the staff, I felt in my heart like, one, if I'm being honest, like I'm not, my heart isn't in it as a player as much anymore. So I don't want to disrespect the game or my teammates by not giving it my all the way that it requires, and the amount of work that I know I need to do my job well. And then two, I felt like with all these experiences, with everything that I've learned as a player, I felt like I was at a legitimate point of like, I think I can use those to really help others. And my heart feels more lit up by that than wanting to continue to pursue playing and whatever that would look like. Um, so I think that initial phone call was just like, "Hey, checking in. Also, we have an opening. What do you think?" And I was like, "Oh, I actually think I'm going to think about it this time."
That's awesome. A couple of things off that. First, like mentioning that that he would check in every once in a while and be like, hey, we have an opening, if you are interested. That reminds me of I did a story on the Sun when they built their new staff out around Stephanie White. Jen Rosati had been trying to get, yeah, had basically been letting Breon January know that she was going to come back and coach for her someday.
Yep.
Before she even came and played in Connecticut, like, she's like, as soon as you retire, I'm going to make sure you have a position wherever. And,
Hmm.
Brianna was like, I don't want that. I don't want to be a coach. It's not going to happen. And lo and behold, now she is like one of the rising coaches in the W, which is to anybody who knows Brown, that's like not surprising at all. But
Nope.
yeah. So it's funny the way that some of that stuff works out. I feel like sometimes the people who see your rise and what you do are most in tune to what you could do in the future than more so than even we are in some ways. So it's kind of interesting the way that
Yes,
works out.
absolutely. I think, and I told when I decided, yes, I'm going to do this. I told Scott, I said, I really do appreciate you, like continuing to think of me, like even if it wasn't like if I wasn't ready or if you didn't actually mean it, like offering like throughout those
Mhm.
years of like, hey, there's an opening. What do you think? It meant something of like he was at least thinking of, because what if I would have said yes? I would have been on staff then. So
Yeah.
it was serious in a lot of ways. Like he wasn't just like blowing smoke in at all. Like, and so I think that has meant a lot to me of there's a belief there. Like there's a belief that I could be of service on a coaching staff in some capacity. Of course, there's so many things to learn. But I think just obviously the history of being an Oregon State basketball player, knowing the university, I'm now working with one of my former teammates as well. And so that's such a cool dynamic because like when we're recruiting, like we're just being genuine. Like we can talk
Mhm.
from our experiences as teammates. And then now working with Scott, like I was coached by him and our other man on staff, he was our assistant coach too. So it's like it's built for me to also feel comfortable to ask questions as I'm learning. And so those years of him offering like putting it on the table and just keeping the door open, like that meant a lot to me once I finally reached this point of like, I'm gonna open the door now
Yeah.
and I'm gonna step through.
Yeah, I wanna backtrack again too, because just to elaborate on it a little bit, you mentioned, feeling like your heart wasn't in playing to the same level anymore. Can you kinda expand on that? Because that's something that I went through a little bit, and I think for people who haven't gone through that, it's a very uncomfortable
Yeah.
feeling when you, like, because like, for reference, I had my playing career kinda shut down a little bit early. I had a heart injury. It was like, that just kinda
Mm,
thing it derails things a little bit. And I tried to come back after, I'd done all the rehabilitation stuff I needed to, and I was just like, "Yeah, man, I don't know if I can put in the work I was anymore." Or it's like
yeah.
you can, but it's like I don't really
So
want to after I'm out of it for a little bit. Like, it's kind of like nice not having to do this. So how do what was that like for you? How did you kind of come to terms with that?
yeah. I when I was rehabbing, so I tore my ACL March of 2022.
Mhm.
And it was a longer rehab process than I anticipated. And so I wanted to quit when I was in rehab. I was like, I've done it all in my book. Like I'm cool.
Rehab
And
sucks. I don't think
it's the
it's
worst.
actually terrible.
It's the worst. And like you feel like you have to do something every day or your body hurts. Like you have
Mhm.
to. And so it's exhausting and like physically, mentally, emotionally. The little wins you learn to celebrate, but there are days where you're like, I don't know if am I ever going to be able to like move the way I want to again.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of doubts that you're wrestling when you're going through a long rehab process like that. But thankfully, the people around me, I would not have played again without their encouragement and their belief, and through prayer and just thinking like, okay, it's pretty clear. Like I know I'm supposed to continue to play, and I'm so grateful that I did because I was able to prove like my body could get through a season healthy. I got my foot back in the door with a W. Um, and that was enough for me. Like I think during rehab, I still like being in the gym was still like breathing. Like I loved being able to go and shoot. I loved being able to do basketball workouts. That was like the reward for all the rehab work that you
Mhm.
do to get to that point. And then but that process and then playing a full season and then the mental physical prep for another training camp, and then training camp is the worst. I cannot stand training camp because it's every day is a tryout, and you every day you're being evaluated. Every movement that you make you just feel like it matters, and it does. um but it's like a different level of exhaustion when you get to the end of it because you're just like fighting to prove yourself again and again and again. And so when I didn't make the team, there was no bad blood by any means. I think that's when I just was like, I'm tired and I'm gonna take a break from being in the gym. And then like till this day, I have not missed being in the gym. Like
Yeah.
it's almost like my heart just sort of shut down that component of my life. Um, and there's really no words to it. Like you said, like I can't explain it either. Cause like now when my agent was presenting me opportunities to play overseas, I'm finally healthy. Like I just made it through 2 years of rehab and, played in Turkey successfully, was in the a W training camp. Like now the momentum is there. So it would make sense to like build off that momentum and okay, we're going to go overseas and now the W is expanding. So there's going to be more opportunities to play. And it was still like, I know I'm not supposed to play,
Yeah.
and I'm okay. I had to ask myself, like, do I have peace? Because when Scott also presented the opportunity, he said, you can do both. Like, I'm not trying to say stop playing basketball. Like, try it out. If you like it, we can go from there. But if it's not for you, you can go back and play in the W next summer. Like, I'm not trying to take away playing from you by any means. Um, again, because I'm so one track minded, and because this job, being a D1 assistant coach in general, it requires everything. And so I know I can't do both. And because of where my heart was already at as a basketball player, I was like, I don't want to disrespect the game. And it's not, it's not functioning the same. It's not the same to me. It's almost like, as I've transformed, the game of basketball has also transformed. Like, what it once was to me is now coming alive in a different way through, like, the lens of these student athletes that I get to
Mhm.
help. It's like the craziest transition that I'm so grateful for, because there's been peace the whole time. There hasn't been like a wrestling match of like, oh, I think I still want to play. Because if I had any ounce of I still want to play, I'd still be playing.
Yeah.
But it's like a different lifetime, a past life where I was a basketball player, even though it was like 3 months ago.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing that because I think it's so fascinating again because like when you're growing up, you don't really think about it. You're like, oh well, everybody should be able to play until their mid 30s. And now I'm like, that is the exception, not the norm, dude. Like I can't even imagine. Like
Exactly.
I'm 27 and I wake up and I'm like, I have to stretch for like 40 minutes before I feel like fully good and like ready for a
Yep.
day. I'm like, what does that look like in 4 years? Like, how do I,
Mhm.
because I can imagine that's only worse. Like, it's just, I mean, like my girlfriend was visiting the other day, and we went to just go play tennis, and, like I mean, I'm still, like, athletic or whatever, but I'm like, "Dude, I have to, like," because she's, like, 23, so I was like, "Alright, dude, well, I gotta warm up." She's like, "No, let's go." I'm like, "No, I have to warm up because if I don't warm up,
Not
something
gonna
bad could
end
happen to
well.
my knee here." So, like, let's be careful, but exactly, like, it's just it's so interesting, thinking about those things as you get older that you don't necessarily think about when you're in college, when you're, like, kinda getting into that stuff. Um, transitioning to talking now about being at OSU though, um, it's so different too going from like, okay, obviously you know what it's like to be a player in Corvallis, but how what has it been like kind of getting a feel for your role as a coach and figuring out what that is on the fly. And I'm sure Scott has done a great job of elaborating things out because it's a very structured place, but like I know a lot of that is kind of like you just have to find yourself in it. So what has that been like for you so
Mhm.
far?
So I got hired in July, and the next day recruiting started. So, like, that was the evaluation period, like the big evaluation month for girls b-ball is in July. And so
Yeah.
I was like, all right, diving into it. So I went to a tournament with 1,000 teams, 85 courts. That was my first day on the job, and I said, what no better way to start than being completely immersed in, like, high school basketball again, and just getting a feel for that component of it. Because
Hmm.
I had a meeting with Scott before it all started, and I couldn't grasp, and he really reminded me, like, recruiting is like probably 65% of what we do.
Yeah.
And I was talking about, like, on court this and blah blah blah, and he said recruiting, recruiting. And so I'm grateful I started with recruiting, because that gave me a taste of, like, okay, now when I start to develop these relationships, I have seen some of them and I can feel what that is. Instead of just like being so I feel like I would have rather started with that for sure than, like, starting on the court with our team, because those relationships, the future matters. Like, you're always trying to bring that next class in. And so it was helpful to start in July. It was absolutely insane, because it was like weekends on the road, Corvallis for 3 days, weekends on the road until, like, you get to August. And so it was crazy. But I was led to so many, and it was also really cool to see coaches and friends and people that I haven't seen for years on the road. And so
Mhm.
developing those relationships, people were so helpful and kind. And so it was like built in community right away. Like, welcome, we're happy to have you. Here's, like, do you know a restaurant that you can go to? Here's a snack bar that you can go to. These are the times that you can take breaks, because there's games all day. Um, and so I think being immersed in recruiting has been super helpful for me, because that is something that, like, you just, of course, when you're a college player, like, you recruits come to visit and you talk to them, you get to know them a little bit, but, like, the work that goes in behind the scenes, that's not a college player's job. And so, like, that's our job. So I got to really feel that early. And then I think our staff, again, so helpful, like Scott, Devin, Coach Eli, um, our director of operations, Olivia, and then we have a grad assistant, Jared, and they've all been together for years now. And I've had previous relationships with the three other coaches. But they have been so instrumental in just like all the little nuances of like an onboarding hiring process and like a living situation and all the details that come with like I'm moving, like I'm uprooting my life to come back here and to become established again takes some time just as a person. But I have felt help every step of the way. And then from a coaching standpoint, I think I've really tried to approach it with like listening. Like I'm listening, I'm learning the right questions to ask and just the things along the way of um, this is what this is what is necessary for this part of the season. So like from a recruiting standpoint, from okay, now we're going into more in-season work. So like preparing scouts, watching film, going to open gyms, being on court, a practice plan. So there's like so many other things behind the scenes, like we talked about earlier, like the 5% that is seen in the light, all the other stuff that goes on in the dark. I'm used to that type of approach, but it's just now new things that I'm pouring my attention and energy to get to game time. And so I'm
Yeah.
learning all of those things from that coaching standpoint.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know you went overseas too for some scouting stuff as well. So like what is, again, like getting into all of that, what has that been like and kind of getting used to the travel the travel for it? 'Cause like for reference, I was talking to a friend of mine who's an assistant coach and he was like, "Yeah, I'm just like popping over for a quick trip to Australia." I'm like, "Dude, there is no such thing as a quick trip to Australia." That's like a quick trip is me like I live in Cleveland. I'm like a quick trip is me going to Detroit for a day. Like, it's not a quick trip to take a 25-hour flight, but exactly. I mean, like that's what the summer is. So,
Yeah.
where I'm trying to think where because you got hired after U17 and stuff, right? Or was that I mean,
I was at
Eurobasket
the
stuff or
I was at the U16s
Oh,
in
okay.
Turkey and Hungary. Yeah, so I think with the travel, I'm used to that in many ways because when I was in you travel all summer, and
For
then when you
sure.
go overseas, like you go overseas, and then if you're on a Euro Cup or a Euro League team, like you're traveling to other countries for quick trips. Like, hey, I'm in Italy, we're going to take a quick trip to France. And so, like, I love that. I love the component of like I can establish and like start to plant roots for the first time since I graduated college, but I still have to see the country, to see the world, to be connected to people in the basketball world requires traveling. And so when I went to Turkey, I was able to see one of my teammates there in between like tournament games and like connect with her and ask how she's doing and like have time with her face to face, which is so like again, it makes the world feel so small.
Yeah.
And then when I was in Budapest, my former teammate, I played in Australia my first year overseas, and she's been playing in Hungary for the last 2, 3 years. And so I told her, I was like, hey, like I don't know where you're at in Hungary, but like I'll be in Budapest. And she had just gotten to town. And so she made the drive to come and have lunch with me too. And I hadn't seen her since 2018. And so
That's
like,
awesome.
of course, like, yeah, going to do her job, like going to watch games and do what we're supposed to. But um, there's some downtime occasionally where like if you every time I travel somewhere, I think to myself, who do I know? Do I know anybody in this city? Do I know anybody in this country? And like that's such a crazy thing to even like think about. Like, do I know anyone in this country? That's crazy. And so
Yeah.
it's really cool to like have I mean, part of the job is traveling. So I am never going to complain about traveling the world to watch kids play basketball.
Yeah, absolutely not. There's no complaints with that. Especially too, U16 had good talent, so that was fun to watch. But um
Yes.
yeah, to close out too, I mean, just in terms of like looking ahead to this year, what parts are you most excited about? Obviously, I know you guys have a very competitive non-con, and it's going to be. I still am like trying to wrap my head around Oregon State and Washington State in the WCC, but part of what's exciting about that too is like I think it's going to be a really fun conference to watch just in general. But like, what are you most looking forward to? And 41 days is our first game, so
Wow.
yeah,
Wow. Yeah, I think for me, the joy comes from watching this team take on their own path and their journey, and just how they're developing bonds and relationships, and like when the light bulb goes off on the court and they're like they get concepts for the first time, like that's so fun to watch and see. And so I think just might be a cliche answer, but honestly, just like being able to watch this team come together and like navigate it as a group, and obviously we'll help them with that, but it's theirs. Like it's their season, and it's their experience that they get to cultivate together. Um, and so I'm really just excited to see, like, from when we started on court with them in, was it July or August, to like when we get to March and April, like what who how their confidence has blossomed and how their relationships and their love for one another has just become like on a completely different level, that only happens through time and going through like real life stuff together. And so that was why I wanted to come back and help and serve, because our experience as a college athlete, like I want I want young women to be able to experience what we were able to feel.
Mhm.
And the root of that is love and connection, and that's the beauty of a team sport as well. So it's been fun to just see how they've grown since we've started, and how that's going to just continue to build as we go through the course of a basketball season. So that's what I'm the most excited for.
Yeah, I can't wait. It's gonna be a wild college season if if anything's any kind of indication. But lastly, too, if if right now is any indication, headband's still coming on, or is headband just kind of retired now as well?
A headband is retired. This is what I wear on my day to day. It's not the same because obviously the headband would be in the
Yeah,
middle of the forehead.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, this I just have, honestly, there's not even really a fun story with like even this headband. It's just because I am lazy. And so like I just try to keep my hair out of my face. But the forehead headband as of now is retired. Salute headband gang.
Good to know. But Sydney, no, I really appreciate your time. This was dope to catch up and get to know you a little bit. To everyone watching and listening, of course, keep up with all things Oregon State women's basketball. If you haven't already, go subscribe. And also for people who are listening and not watching, Sid is wearing a, I guess it's technically a wrap instead of a headband right now. My girlfriend will kill
Yeah.
me for that. But yeah, it's thank you again to everyone listening. Enjoy the rest of your day.